No? Oh, there we go. Thank you. I'm Gary Keith, the chair of the School Building Committee. Thank you for coming out on a not-so-nice night. Really appreciate it. Run through the information on the proposed feasibility study. But first, we have the Scouts going to come out and lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you.
Robert. Good job, boys.
All right, this presentation tonight is being recorded and will be posted on the West Bridgewater Community Access channel as shortly afterwards, so that that can be made available to others who weren't here tonight. So pass the word, neighbors and friends, and make sure they try to get as much information about what we're proposing so they can, so we can make an informed decision come to the town meeting. Also, you should have received a handout that has a QR code that'll take you to the webpage that's been established for the project. And that'll continue to be updated. It has been already. We have our meeting minutes and the statements of interest, and a lot of the information we'll be going over tonight. But that'll continue to be updated, and this is a code to get direct access to that information. So I'll pause this for a minute because our committee is big, and that's a good thing in my opinion. And we did the same thing with the project for this building right here, and I think it was a smart decision. By the way, before I proceed, we've got committee members tonight, so if I just have the committee members who are here present tonight, just to raise your hand. And again, I want to thank them for their commitment, and I think there are about 4 or 5 of us left over from this project, and most of the others on the committee roster, this is their first rodeo in this kind of an effort, and I'm not sure they know really what they've signed up for, but the committee stayed in effect for this project for 10 full years, almost to the day. So that's the kind of commitment that goes into a project and all the steps that we have to follow in dealing with the Massachusetts School Building Authority. It's a good thing, but it does take time. We feel that it's important to have a committee this size, and our experience with this project proved it, to have input from the relevant committees and boards within the town, obviously the school administration, the staff, parents, people that have skills in the building trades, and we think they're well represented by this roster. The School Building Authority disagrees with us. In fact, for this project, the high school project as well as the elementary school project, they advised us both times that our committee was too big, and we pushed back on that. And I think we proved them right with the middle senior high school project. I think we'll prove them right again with the elementary school project, because it's important to have as many voices as reasonably possible sitting around the table for input to make sure we're all on the same page moving forward. So again, thank you to the committee members who agreed to sign on to this, and buckle up. So this is the timeline so far, relatively short time frame, and a lot has to happen moving forward, but this is what's happened so far. So the statements of interest were submitted back in April for the Roselle McDonald School and Spring Street School. 2 of those were submitted separately with the idea that we were looking at some sort of project for both of those buildings. The MSBA conducted a study of the school by coming out to visits to both schools the following month. In December, they accepted the Roselle McDonald School for feasibility study and entered into the formal eligibility period. So that's what we're doing now. We're having the feasibility during this elementary period. It's an important designation that they accepted the McDonald School first, and I'll talk about that more later, what that means for the options that we have to look at as part of feasibility. However, what they also did is they said that we could bring in Spring Street at the same time. And then they also said, we like the idea of consolidation so much, we want you to look at Howard as well. So a separate statement for Howard School was submitted subsequent to that meeting. So in essence, all three buildings are on the table, all three schools are on the table. But again, nothing is decided yet about how we're going to manage that. But it gives us a lot of flexibility and a lot of options to look at going down the road. In June, the School Building Authority approved our committee roster. Superintendent Bodwell is the appointing authority for the roster, but the designation for the accepting, if you will, or approving the roster comes from the School Building Authority. And that happened in June. And then we've had 3 formal meetings since then. And again, those meeting minutes are posted on the information page. You can go back and take a look at those. So I am going to turn it over to Superintendent Bodwell right now to run through the background on the statements of interest, area concerns, and the enrollment. And then I'll come back and walk us through the process.
Thank you, Skeet. So when we submit the statement of interest, we have to select some priority areas. And they were consistent for all 3 statements of interest we submitted. The first had to do with prevention of severe overcrowding, which is probably our biggest concern, and we'll talk more about that later. But the overcrowding in the elementary schools is a major concern. The second priority area had to do with the replacement, renovation, and modernization of the school's facility system. We'll talk again later about the age of the buildings, and their age is starting to show. And finally, the replacement or addition of the buildings in terms of a full range of academic programs within the building. The buildings that are 50 plus years old function great in that time, but now much more modern facilities are necessary to best educate our children. So we've looked at areas of concerns, and I've shared these concerns, and again, they remain very consistent. The major concern of lack of classroom space due to the increased enrollment. We really are running out of space, literally, at the elementary schools. We are lacking integrated and interactive technology. We took a great step forward with the interactive touch panels at the elementary level, but there's still more to go. We lack breakout spaces and small group spaces within the buildings. And we need an updated HVAC, electrical, plumbing, etc. When something breaks, it's not usually just one thing. It continues on to the next thing, and the next thing they continue to chase down leaks or plumbing issues and so forth. Special education suites are needed in terms of more space, more centralized spaces for our children with the greatest needs. We lack space for related services, speech, PT, OT, APE, Title I, and our EL students. Most of the time they're in very cramped and shared spaces, or they're in the hallways. Specialist spaces are pretty much gone. They used to have their own spaces in the different schools. Those have been taken over by general classroom space. The PTO has done a wonderful job providing some flexible and modern furniture, but we lack that across the board at the elementary level. And just in general, adaptable and flexible spaces within the schools. To hold meetings, to have breakout spaces, to even to have PD in the buildings. We'll have our elementary staff come here for those. Other areas of concern are, again, the age of the buildings. They range from 55 to 67 years old. The Howard School did go through some renovations in the near past, but still, the bones of the buildings are very old. All schools are experiencing some internal and external structural issues, wear and tear that is expected with the age of the buildings. Our maintenance and custodial staff have done a wonderful job over the years, taking care of the buildings and patching things, but the wear and tear is showing. The overall space of the elementary are small. When you combine all 3 elementaries together, it's 112,000 square feet. For comparison, this building here is 142,000 square feet, and we have many more students at the elementary than we do at the secondary. And outdated fire protection. So if we were to do any renovations in any elementary buildings, we would have to update the electric fire systems throughout all the buildings. We've talked about a lot. The population in schools in West Bridgewater is growing. MSBA agrees with us. When they looked at our population growth, they said that West Bridgewater is one of the few communities of school populations that continue to grow. Since 2017, we've seen a pretty consistent rise in our student population. That's due to the number of homes that are being built. Over 150 homes are in the process or in the planning phase of being built. There are also apartment buildings that are being built or planned. The MBTA rail housing will create a minimum of 143 other units within the town. And we've worked diligently with the MSBA to share this information. So thank you to all the town departments who have gathered information so we can share it. So that number is going to continue to rise. So as part of the enrollment process, one of the deliverables for this phase of the project, we have to look at enrollment and to come up with a design enrollment number. So we've had 2 meetings with a subgroup of our school building committee with the MSBA sharing information. Lots of information to share with them. They met with us, we reshared other information, they asked questions, we got answers, and we went back and forth. I think they've been very collaborative in the process in terms of looking at our enrollment. And I think what they've given us for a number are very fair and just. They use a modified cohort survival methodology. Please don't quiz me on that. It's pretty intense in terms of what they look at. They look at the number of building permits issued. They look at birth rates. They look at number of students transferring in and out of schools. They do look at our overall enrollment, which does include our current school choice students. And our current pre-K to 6 enrollment is 783, and that's as of this week. When we look, though, at enrollment figures to the MSTA, you'll notice it does not include preschool, but they will include space for preschool. Talk about that in a minute. So here are the numbers, if you look at it. So on the left-hand side, we have the grades and the schools listed. In the next verse, says current. That's our current enrollment numbers as of this week. The next is MSBA projected numbers, and then the final column on the right are the additional students. So you'll see that at the Roselle McDonald, they are looking at an increase over the next 10 years of 130 students. If they take the Spring Street and Roselle, you'll see those numbers going up to 169 additional students. If we look at Roselle and Howard, okay, going up to 298. And then if we're going all in and looking at all 3 schools, we're at 1,075 total students. Like I said, you have to also include the numbers for the preschool, so we'd be over around 1,150 total. This just shows the blue are our current numbers, the red are the projected numbers, and the yellow is the additional number of students. This presentation, as Mr. Key said, is click on the QR code, but it's also on the building website. What's the reality? If in the future what we're going to need, we're going to need modular portable classrooms. If we, just down the road with the increase in numbers, like I said, we are running out of space. We can't take cafeteria space for classrooms, we can't take gym space. Every other usable space will be used within the next couple of years. Modular classrooms, we'll need to find locations for them, parking lots. Open space have to be used. They, the downside, obviously, they're removed from the traditional school. They would have to, security concerns, people having to go outside. I think that would take away from the connectedness of the school and the students. We have maintenance costs, HVAC, and other issues related to potential break-ins and vandalism. And like I said, as of next year, we will be out of pretty much usable classroom space for grade level instruction. Currently, grades K, 1, 2, 3, and 5 all have 5 sections. I can still remember years ago when we talked about the bubble class. We're kind of all bubbles now, I think. There are very few non-bubble classes. Those would be grades 4 and 6 currently. And those are getting dangerously close to the need for a fifth section, just by the sheer number of students who are moving into the district. So again, what we would need over the next 5 to 10 years would be some multiple portable or modular classrooms. We would go from, by looking at the MSBA data, we would go from 5 sections up to potentially 7 sections. So that is adding 2 per grade, and that's where we get the 2 kindergarten classrooms, 2 in each of the Roselle and Howard schools, for a total of 14 modular classrooms. Those will be taken into account with a building project. And that does include, you know, the cost of delivery, site work, setup, foundations, and all else that goes along with it. I mean, the cost is quite expensive to do this. So that's the reality, that we're going to need additional space for our kids.
Thank you, Mark. Let me just walk you through now a little bit of the process with the school building authority. And again, for those of you who were here during this project, it's very similar. It really hasn't changed at all in the 13 years since we started to work with them back in 2010. So basically, this was legislation. They're working on the legislation that came about as a result of some school projects around the state that got a lot of negative press in terms of the expense and size of the building and perceptions about what it is the community received for their dollar. So this was a way to formalize the process for state reimbursement for school projects. And it's based on a formula rate. And the baseline rate, so that's the reimbursement percentage, is 31 points, or 31%. And then, similar to the enrollment process, they have a quite complicated formula for how they go about factoring additional percentage points beyond that baseline, based on community income, based on property wealth, property values, and their poverty factor. So they're looking at all those factors about the community itself and determining what it is they're going to settle on for a reimbursement rate for any school project. And it changes. It doesn't stay the same from project to project. We can expect a different rate this time than what we had the last time. I'll talk about that in a second. There are additional points offered. We received additional points for this building. There were green programs that got us additional points. Best practices for routine and capital maintenance awarded additional points. Now, renovation and reuse, and again, those of you who went through this with this building may remember, as chair of that committee, I stood up here at this meeting for this building and basically said at the time we were headed down a path of renovation for the existing high school. And we were hoping that that would get us more points. But in the end, the difference between the construction costs for renovating the old building versus building this building was a delta of about $2 million. And it just didn't seem worth the price to having to go through that renovation project and live in that building while we were renovating it. And obviously we didn't do that. You'll see when you get to the town meeting in October that we have language in the motion that does use the phrase renovation or reuse, however it's worded, because we don't want to exclude that option if we get through feasibility and find that there is perhaps an opportunity to look at renovation of one of the buildings, although personally, just me talking, I don't see that that's feasible, but we don't want to exclude it either and not have the ability to look at it as part of feasibility in terms of looking at the whole scope of the project. So we'll leave that wording in there, but unlike the last project for this building, I can really say that I just don't see that as a viable option this time around. The code issues, Mark referenced fire protection. It's not just fire protection. In the old high school building or any of these buildings that we talk about renovating, they have to all be brought up to the existing code. Fire protection is a big part of that, but so is electrical, so is earthquake, believe it or not. And for the existing building, high school building, we were going to have to take off the entire roof deck and strengthen that building to the current earthquake requirements, which are significant compared to when that building was built. And that's going to be the truth for the other 3 schools as well. So currently, the reimbursement rate that we have been designated for from the School Building Authority is 54.79%. So that means, and that includes this study that we're proposing, so that means we would be reimbursed at a rate of 54.79% for the cost of feasibility and theoretically construction. Now, this is where I have to do a sidebar in the interest of putting all the cards on the table. New to us in this process, compared to the high school project, was a comment from the school building authority staff that what's different between when we did the high school project versus today is the fact that inflation has increased, obviously, and compared to what we were back in 2010 to 2015 period during that project, and that their budget has not always kept pace with the rate of inflation in recent years. So while we expect to see a full 54.79% reimbursement for feasibility, when we get to the point 2 years from now, and that's the earliest, I'll talk about the timeline a little bit, but 2 years from now is the earliest that we would be talking about being ready to prepare a town meeting warrant article with a total project cost for whatever it is we might be recommending. There is a possibility that the MSBA would come back and recalculate that 54.79% to a lower value. Hopefully that doesn't happen, but it could happen. But we're going to go in with the idea that we'll be at a 54.79%. Obviously, if there was a significant drop-off in that, perhaps any drop-off in that, that we as a school building committee would not feel comfortable going forward with any recommendation for a significant expenditure of town money beyond the reimbursement rate of 54.79%. But I feel it's important to share with you the information that we heard from the state that was a little bit shocking, to be honest with you, and hopefully their budget is able to recover enough that when we get 2 years down the road and are prepared to have a budget figure for a project, whatever that project is, that will still be at the 54.79%. But we are at that rate today. We are at that rate for what we're proposing for feasibility. So at the October 16th meeting, we will be requesting a figure of $1.2 million for the feasibility study and schematic design. And this is where I talked about the word renovation, for the potential construction, renovation, addition of the elementary schools. And again, undefined. So it's very humbling for me to have to stand up here, just like I did 13 years ago, and tell you that we want this amount of money and not be able to describe to you what the project is going to be that we're going to recommend. We don't know. That's the purpose of feasibility study. Out in front of you is all the documents that were procured as part of the feasibility study for the middle senior high school. So it's a tremendous volume of work that's done over a 2-year period. And it costs a lot because you're talking about, we'll go through the project manager and the architect in a second, but you have a lot of staff, professional staffs, consultants, and engineers basically giving you not only a final design for whatever you're going to recommend, but all the options that go into that. As a way to figure out how much that is going to cost us, we did do an analysis working with the school building authority to try to come up with some comparison feasibility studies that were done in other communities across the state. So they gave us a number of communities to look at. We selected 12 of them that we felt comfortable in terms of the range of projects. For one thing, they were all elementary schools. They gave us 16 to look at. 4 of them were not elementary schools. We tossed those out because we felt at least that was the best apples to apples comparison. The type of community varied in terms of, did they all look like the town of West Bridgewater? No, they didn't. They had different reimbursement rates because they were different types of communities. One thing they did have, though, is they had the range of population that were on the slide that Superintendent Bodwell showed. So we were comfortable that if we looked at a combination of 2 schools or a combination of 3 schools, whatever we looked at in terms of the final project, we were in the range within these other 12 communities of projects that were previously done. So if we looked at the cost of the feasibility studies for those particular projects, and we used the term average, it may not exactly have been an average, but we felt comfortable with a number of 1.2 million to ask for that. Let's compare it to one other thing. How much did we ask for feasibility in 2010 for this building? Anybody remember? Committee members? Anybody remember what we asked for this building for feasibility? $800,000. So in 2010, we asked for $800,000 for this building, and obviously it was approved. If you just look at inflation alone, in 2010 to 2023, it's 39.9%, 40% You plug in 800,000 into that formula, you come up with just under 1.2 million. So just inflation alone, even if we weren't trying to look at a building-to-building comparison, would put us in the range of a reasonable request, we think, as a school building committee, in terms of what we might get for feasibility and what we'd be able to accomplish with that money. So at our last meeting, the School Building Authority did approve this 1.2 million request unanimously and will be part of the article to be voted on October 16th. So what do we get for that? Well, the most important thing we get is what's called the OPM, or the Owner's Project Manager. And they're an agent, and yes, we're paying them, but they're an agent working for us. And this is required under the 2004 construction, sorry for where it keeps breaking out, Construction Reform Act. Again, that legislation that established the School Building Authority and the reimbursement process. That was the most critical element of the construction of this building right here, was our project manager. The OPM was the key factor in this project being finished on time and under budget, was that OPM. They were critical to us. They were with us the whole 10 years. You can actually make a switch in OPM between feasibility and construction. We did not do that. We had no interest in doing that. We worked so well with them, and hopefully the OPM that we hire this time will have the same type of working relationship. It's that critical to the success of the project, and it'll be the most critical thing to me, even more critical than hiring the next position, which is the designer, or more commonly termed the architect, the one that will basically be responsible for putting that project together with all the subs that they have to deal with and coming up with a full project design. So basically at the end of this, with the OPM overseeing the architect, we'll come back with a recommended project, having looked at a number of options. The School Building Authority is going to mandate that we look at a number of options, and I'll go back to the statement of interest. So I said that the original statement of interest that the School Building Authority accepted this time around was the Rose L. McDonald School. So we'll now be required under that process to at least do one option that looks at just the replacement of the Rose L. McDonald School. We've already told the School Building Authority we have no interest in doing that. That would not be the recommended project. It wouldn't solve our problems, our needs. They understand that, but they said, their response was, well, that's what we accepted as an original statement of interest, so you have to do that as one of the options. So we get that. And the OPMs and the architects, they live this process with the School Building Authority. They get it. They know what they have to do in terms of dealing with these options, and they will work toward spending a minimal amount of time on looking at just a Rose L. McDonald option, because we have to check that box in terms of the expense that they would have to charge for that piece. They get it. Another important point is the OPM and the architect both come from an approved list by the School Building Authority, so firms that have worked with them and get evaluated by the communities and to maintain their good standing with the School Building Authority, so we'll work from that list. We have the full ability to choose the OPM, the one we think best serves our needs. The architect has to be selected in combination with the School Building Authority board themselves. So we basically get votes around the table with their board members. But again, living through that process with this building, there was never an issue. We were always on the same page with them about who we were intended to select as architects. So I don't see that as an issue. They'll work very closely with us to make sure that we work toward the same objective in terms of selecting an architect. So again, the preliminary design program, I won't read everything on the slide. You can see that, but it basically, again, is everything that's laid out on the table here. So in simple terms, and based on what we're looking at, there are a lot of things we need to look at. We're gonna look at what's the combination of schools, where is it going to be located, what are the options in terms of number of buildings. So all the sites are going to have to be looked at. Are there any other sites in town? I don't know. I mean, we may try to look at that as well, but I don't think so. But it's a blank sheet of paper when you start. Again, the committee will have some idea of where we want to go, and we'll direct the OPM and the architect about where they should look and where they can't look. But we'll be looking at those options as part of feasibility. And obviously, we'll quickly narrow it down. We can't have it completely wide open for very long because we've got to get focused to decide what options make sense, which ones don't, and what are we going to move forward. And then after we've put, let's say, 4, 5, 6 options on the table, we'll go through a selection process with the school building committee and decide picking which ones we're going to keep or which one we're going to keep and move forward a recommendation for a final project. And that's what would go to the floor for a vote in a couple of years, assuming we're on the same page for that. It would not be a case of going to town meeting with 5 or 6 options and asking the town to pick those. They would be selected by the school building committee based on all the information that we gathered during feasibility. Again, I just talked about this in terms of looking at alternatives. A construction schedule would be established for that period moving forward. So it's a 2-year process for feasibility, assuming we get a town meeting vote, a successful vote to move forward with that. And of course, based on the scope of the project, it would need both a town meeting vote as well as a debt exclusion election following. So it would be a 2-step process to get through that. And then we'd look at a construction timetable moving forward for that, which is, again, roughly going to be probably 2 years beyond that. So this is a very similar slide to what we had back in 2010 about why now. And I think the biggest part is we're on the list with the state. That's the most important factor. During this last round of feasibility, they look at feasibility once every year. And when they selected us this last round, we were one of 10 projects in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts that was selected. So out of, I don't know the total number that were submitted, but I guarantee you it was way more than 10. Only 10 communities were selected for 10 projects, and we were one of them. That's important. So roughly, again, 54.79% of that number holds is what we anticipate to get. Obviously, all the areas of concern that Superintendent Bodwell presented with the buildings and the issue with classroom spaces. The issues that we have with the elementary schools, yes, age of the building is out there, but they're different than what we had for the replacement of the middle senior high school. And we really didn't have large enrollment figures that we're dealing with today when we went through that process. So it is different than what we had before. But nonetheless, the need is still there, and we're on the list, and I think that's important. Seeing the school building authority react to our potential growth figures and see them be very liberal with their increase factor, personally, I didn't expect to see that. I did not expect to see a number of 1075 based on the early discussions we had with them. But we proved to them that we have the growth and are going to continue to see the growth based on what we know about the development in the town. This last point about us paying 100% of the cost, certainly the cost of temporary classroom space, if we need that modular classrooms, would be borne by the town, and any other significant project could be 100% if we try to do that on our own, whatever it is. If we don't get approval at town meeting this time around to move forward with feasibility, we could go back and start the process over, but you lose your place in line and you don't know when you're going to get accepted again within their process. Because it is very competitive, and obviously based on their budget concerns, they're going to be probably more selective than they have been in the past. So we have a unique opportunity, and as a school building committee, we think we should take advantage of it. And with that, I'll open it up to any questions. We have a small enough group. I don't think we need to make people come to the mic, but if you do have any questions for myself or the superintendent, just please stand and speak loudly so people can hear your question.
Hi, I'm Glenn Turner. I'm just curious where does athletic spaces fall into this? I noticed it wasn't anybody on the committee that was athletically, anybody from athletics, and where does all the athletic spaces fall into this? There's no mention of any of that.
So with every building project, there is an allocation percentage-wise of outside spaces, including not only just general landscaping and so forth, but related to fields. But in all honesty, it's very minimal, which is why for this building, the vast brunt of everything that was built with the football field and the track and so forth and the baseball field all that was paid for by the town. So the school building authority is not in the business of reimbursing for larger scale athletic development. The issue of if we, just as a what if, not saying this is going to happen, but a what if we take the fields, the existing soccer fields, to build on that as a site, the issue of replacement of that will have to be looked at as part of our plan, and replacement of that, assuming we're going to find another location to substitute for those fields, would have to be part of the overall project we present to the town, but those costs, in all likelihood, would be covered 100% by the town in having to replace those fields.
And Mr. Flynn is a former school committee member and also one of our coaches, so he's somewhat representing, but I also know that the concern of gym space has been raised. I think the MSBA will dictate, size of spaces, but I think anything we want in that elementary school, we want gym space so we can take some of the pressure off this building.
That's just one of my big concerns with this. We do all this.
Again, you just mind standing so everybody can hear you.
So we do all this, and then we have less space for athletics. We already don't have enough. That's all. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Other questions?
Yeah, Chris Smith, 48 Roosevelt. Question does the committee have any kind of recommendation what they're proposing at this point for a school? I know you mentioned that MSBA has multiple options to look at. You guys must have some kind of idea of what they'd like to do.
Well, no. I think the answer to the question is no. In our 3 meetings, we have not settled on any discussion about what it is we're going to propose at this point. We really need the input of an OPM and an architect to help us guide us down that path. I think, again, based on the original 2 statements of interest, when we started this project, it was the idea of combining Spring Street and Roselle on the Spring Street lot. That was sort of the notion that started the process from the town's perspective. The MSBA sort of threw a curveball at us and said, yeah, fine, but look at Howard as part of that. So that made our job much more complicated. It may end up being a better solution if we put everything under one roof, but the issue then becomes where. And I think there are several of us on the committee, even though we haven't had full discussion, but that the idea being that the likelihood of being able to build a building that would combine all 3 schools on the Spring Street site, which might have been feasible for 2 schools, probably isn't going to work. So it's just made the process much more complicated. But again, we may end up in a much better place as a result of their intervention. But we're not there. And again, that's why it's very humbling to ask for this amount of money from the town and not be able to stand up here and say, this is where we're going to head, because we really don't at this point, because it wouldn't be really, it wouldn't be the right thing for us to do to make any sort of formal vote or recommendation as a committee with no real basis to make that decision. Other questions?
Dave Lamline. On the $1.2 million for the feasibility, is that the town's share, or is that the total in the next?
That's the total, and we expect to be reimbursed for the 54.79%. But it's a requirement that the town appropriate the full amount, sure, and then being reimbursed based on the expenses. And there's no provision that says we have to spend the full amount. That's just would be the amount we have to work with, a combination between the town money and the MSBA. So we incur the expenses, we get the invoices from the OPM and the architect, and then we're reimbursed at that 54.79%.
Question piggyback on that.
Sure.
Are there other towns in the state doing projects similar to combining elementary school?
Yeah, and even beyond that, the closest one to us is the town of Holbrook that built right at the same time or shortly. They were a little bit behind this building. They combined their entire school system under one roof, separate wings and so forth, but it's one project, one roof, everything done at the same time. And several of the projects that we looked at under those 12 as elementary schools were consolidations.
Roger Bodie, you mentioned reimbursement at 54.79%. Is that including the potential for a 2% increase on a grade project and the 2% that you may be credited for your past maintenance projects?
No, 54.79 is our baseline, if you will. That's equivalent to the 31% we start with. So the increase in percentage points comes during construction, not during feasibility, but we would be eligible theoretically for additional points as part of construction.
Well, that would be a minimum. There is still opportunity for the town to recover
Yes.
additional resources.
Yes.
When would we get the reimbursement from the state? Would we have to bond all of it, get it at some other point, or?
I believe the answer to that is no, but is David here?
Yes.
In the shadows.
It's a complicated answer, but it is after we spend the money, we have to submit for reimbursement. There is a lag period. So quite frankly, what we will do is that when it came to this school, we did at least 2, if not 3 bonds. We didn't bond all at the exact same time. But as Gary will attest, all the bills come in, the school building committee approves it. It is then sent to the state. We will pay in advance for reimbursement, and that's why Gary said you have to have approved for the full amount in advance to get reimbursement. So they will not just give us one lump sum check, it will be during the process.
Thank you, David. Other questions?
I have a couple. All right. So, due to the length of time, Mark, this is probably more you, but due to the length of time, we're talking about the best case scenario of like 4 years. That
Yes.
sounds about right?
You mean between now and construction?
Yeah, so that's the area, I guess, right? So
Yes, basically your feasibility is 2 years. You go to the town for approval of that project number, and then you're basically looking at a 2-year construction period.
So the comment about the modular classrooms, are we going to need to do that before those 4 years are up?
I hope not. Right now, we're hoping to stay at the 5 sections per grade. That's the hope. Going to 6 creates problems where we can't fit them. So it's not a great answer, but hopefully not.
Okay. And then you mentioned, Gary, that you had looked at some of the 12 other towns. Were any of those towns comparable? I know you said some of them were not, but were any of them comparable in size and, income level, et cetera, to ours, such that, and then I was wondering, like, how much that costs, if you know?
I can certainly provide all that data. I can get you the 12 towns that
No, I didn't mean the 12. I just meant, like, was there one that stood out for you that you were like, this is kind of like us, this is like us, and this is about how much money they spend?
Well, they're a little bit bigger, but Rockland was in there with an elementary school project. I don't know off the top of my head what their reimbursement rate was, but in terms of scope for combining 2 schools, that one was one that intrigued us. And they were all over the state. Reading was another one. Again, they're a little bit bigger than us. I think most of them were probably bigger than size than we are. But in terms of a key factor that we looked at that kept them in the mix of the 12 that we looked at to come up with that number was the population. So, I mean, again, if we do one building that's, over 1,000 students, one of them was in Lawrence. I mean, Lawrence is a very different, economic and property values situation, but they had a project that was 1,000 students. So we thought that was viable for us to look at in terms of keeping that in the mix and developing our number.
But was there any, like, sort of price-ish? Like, I know a lot of people that are either watching at home or they're here, like, we're talking about construction costs, 40s up from now, right? We've got a lot of inflation in the stock for the period, right? So, like, just to have a general idea of what to expect, like, are we thinking this is like $135 million project?
And Karen, I don't think we can answer that question. I mean, all of these projects were newer than this building. So they were all within the last 4 years. But even some of those when they started, may not reflect accurately if they were doing it today. That probably would be an increased cost. So we're just going to have to deal with that during feasibility and see where we are when we get to that 2-year point in terms of what the number looks at, and having to make sure that whatever number we're asking for, that we can live with that number through the 2 years. I mean, the last thing I want to do as chair of this committee is ever come back to town meeting and ask for more money. I won't do that. And I just want to make sure that we have the right number and we can live with that number when we get to construction.
And then, Mark, you had mentioned that there were some structural issues in some of the schools, and some of that information is here, I apologize, I didn't look at it. So can you speak to what some of those issues are, and then are we in a position where, because there was another piece of the slide that said, at some point, the town would be responsible for making those improvements on our own. I'm just wondering, are we going to have those costs anyway because some of the structural issues are so concerning? Because obviously we want to keep it safe. So
sure. So we have a 5-year capital plan. So we put things in there like redoing the electrical in the buildings. Roofs, Spring Street is newer, but the other one's a little bit older. We do have leaks here and there. There's some lighting issues that we have, replacement of lighting. Windows are old in most of the buildings. So those are all things that add up over time. So I think those are, mainly most of the structural stuff. But there's the unexpected things like boilers and things that happen over time as well with the age of the building.
Do we think, though, that any of those things will need to be fixed between now and 4 years from now?
We hope to continue to have them run efficiently as much as possible. But we put, like I said, we put those in years 4 and 5 down the road to look at replacing generator in the Howard School, things like that. So they're in the plan, but we keep our fingers crossed that they continue to run as needed. Thank you.
Just to add on to that, it is possible there are some capital items that are eligible for school building authority reimbursement other than building a building. I mean, we have dealt with the school building authority on roofs and so forth. There are some of those things. But we want to, obviously manage that process for the 3 buildings, and they're unlikely to work with us on a smaller capital project if we're trying to deal with them on the replacement of that building at the same time.
I have one final question. 12 schools that you mentioned that you guys have. Is there any way to find that information besides like you guys have a website or anything?
We have a document we can post on the website that basically shows, and it shows the average of those costs. It's a spreadsheet for all 12 communities. Happy to post that. Yep. Yeah.
When we're looking at building sites, are we, because obviously the town is continuing to grow, and we have this limited school, but it may get some commercial time as well, and you might need to expand the school further at some point. And if you did, if it was going to go that way, would that take Spring Street out of the mix of like a place to do the goal?
I don't think there's any way for us to answer that right now because it's just not on the table. I mean, we're not even going to look at that.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Other questions? Yep.
Hi, Mark Churchill. In reference to this building, can somebody tell me roughly how many years or how much more we have to pay in money for what we built here?
Mm-hmm.
Ballpark.
Dan?
I believe we started bonding somewhere around 2016, 2017. There was a 30-year bond, so 2044, 2047, somewhere in that range.
But it's also true, David, that we have accelerated our payments on the bonds so that we anticipate in the whole grand scheme of things paying less than what we projected when the project started. Is that a true statement?
We didn't accelerate.
Well, maybe that's not the right word, but...
Weren't you using it, was it a meals tax that was...
No, so what the Board of Selectmen did is that every single year on your Finance Committee budget article, it says to transfer $350,000 towards this project. Our bond is $2.6 million per year. The taxpayer in that budget pays the difference, $2.3 million. The $350,000 comes from free cash, so it offsets your tax rate. If we didn't do that, your taxes would be higher. So if that doesn't accelerate it, it just makes it payment. So if you had a credit card, it's $1,300 a month, you're paying $1,000, somebody else is paying $300. So that's all we did. But it's still a 30-year. Our current bond payment is $2.6 million, and we'll end sometime in the 2040s, 2040s.
Thank you.
Spacing-wise, here, so you've mentioned that you've got a projected growth of a couple hundred students, at least several hundred students in the all of K through 6th grades. What about the impact here? Are we set for this location, or are we going to have a, if we tell them if you build it, they will come. If you expand and you allow for the growth in the K through 6, isn't it just going to ripple to the middle of the high school, and you're going to have a growth problem here as well?
The design enrollment for this building was 625, as of today we have 626. We have more space here due to more openings with students who leave usually in 9th grade to go to vocational or private schools. So we accept more school choice. We would just simply not accept as many school choice at the middle senior high school. So could it be a concern down the road? Certainly it could be. But we're able to manage the numbers more easily here than at the elementary level.
And again, any discussion about issues with this building is not within the purvey of the agreed upon scope within the current school building committee.
Mr. Williamson, so if we do this project with all the 3 schools to 1 school, and it gets done 10 years from then, will there be plenty of room still for the growth of the town for that school with kids, or you're going to have to look forward to adding on to that one 10 years down the road?
The 1075 that is the, we think, is the agreed upon number. It's the number that the school building authority has given us. Includes a projection for that growth out for the 10-year period. It's not a opening day enrollment figure. So we're factoring in a growth number. And again, I'll go back to my earlier statement. I think they've been very liberal with us in that growth factor that they've provided. We gave them some concrete evidence about projects that we know about in town. And we've given that information to them. They've also told us that if we become aware of any other projects that get accepted in the town for development that we weren't aware of at the time the enrollment figure was established, we can go back to them and plead our case that 1075 is good enough. We can't do it once construction starts, but during feasibility we can. So we're accommodating the best growth figure that based on information we have today.
Just to follow up on this question, did we do the same thing for this school at the time when we project out the numbers? Because as you said, Mark, we're already at that number. I mean, this school's been open for less than 10 years. So I guess I think the question is valid in the sense that did we do that when we moved up in the school?
Again, it's not within the scope of this project, but the answer is yes. But the difference is we did not have in 2010 when we did feasibility for this project, we did not have the growth figure that we have today. So the growth figure was allocated, but it wasn't the same level, and that was the graph that Mark showed, because it wasn't enough. Even if we didn't know about the growth based on the projects that have occurred since then, and the school building authority wouldn't have accepted any projection of an enrollment figure beyond what we had then. Questions, Karen?
I'm sorry, just one more. If you go through the feasibility study, and I think you answered this at the very beginning, so I apologize, but I just want to make sure I'm correct. We're thinking about pulling all 3 of the schools together. However, if you go through the feasibility study, the feasibility group will give alternative options to that and not just the 3. So it could be U2, it could be U1.
Correct.
Thank you.
Yeah, so again, just make sure everybody's clear on that. The feasibility study will look at all of those options. We have to start with option 1 is just replacing Roselle McDonald School. But then we will look at the other combinations of 2 or 3 schools and the other site considerations about where those alternatives would go.
Ronnie, Tommy, I'm sorry I came in late, I had another engagement, but I'm not sure if that was mentioned before. When we go to town meeting, we will be presenting option 1, 2, and 3 for voting.
Okay, so the upcoming town meeting is just a vote on the 1.2 million for feasibility. So assuming that goes through and we do the study for 2 years, 2 years from now, the school building committee will have decided, based on all the options that they looked at during feasibility, the recommended option that would be presented to the town. So just like we did in this building, for this building we had 5 total options, 3 renovation addition options, 2 new construction options. The school building committee went through a process that eliminated 4 of those options, and we came forward at town meeting with a recommendation for this project, and that's what was voted on. So we'll do the same thing with this. We will exhaust whatever number of options that we look at as part of feasibility, decide as a committee which one it makes the most sense, the most viable for the community, and we'll bring forward that recommendation. Questions yet?
Does the school building committee have open meetings that people can come and listen and hear what's being presented by your OPM and your architect down the road? And before we reach that point, will we have to vote on what has been decided on by the committee?
Yeah, the meetings have all been posted. They've been open. I admit to you, they have not been, 3 meetings that we currently have not been recorded and put on the community access channel. Once we get past the town meeting vote, and assuming we enter into feasibility, we will broadcast, record and broadcast all future meetings, but of course they are posted and open to the public. Again, I'll go back to this project. When the committee made its final selection, well, we had occasional public presence at our school building committee meetings during the 10 years we were in existence. But we had the largest turnout of public presence during the final vote to narrow down the option from the 5 options that we looked at into the 1 option that we accepted. So there was plenty of visibility, and at that time we did Superintendent Oakley and I did a couple of presentations on cable that were recorded and presented, but we didn't have the regular community access of public meetings like we do today. So we'll be doing that moving forward after assuming the feasibility is accepted at town meeting. Sure.
Will you also be soliciting input from, particularly from staff regarding, this is a massive project, you're looking at combining early education, pre-K to 2, these are our littles, with preteens. And, I think that there really needs to be a delineation between the developmental abilities and the developmental spaces for those 2 populations. So I think soliciting input from staff across the board is going to be essential in what this building is going to look like.
Yes, I totally agree, and we did that with the middle senior high school project. We had meetings with staff, we had people come in sharing information, sharing ideas, sharing concerns and thoughts. So absolutely, we'll be soliciting opinions and information and input from all stakeholders. And that also goes for anyone in the public in terms of questions or concerns now and in the future. If there are concerns or questions you have, please reach out. I present this information at coffee hours, but I'm more than willing to talk about it at any point with anyone who has a concern or a question. The one thing we want to make sure we're transparent and provide information to you. So nothing should be secret, nothing should be unknown at this time. So just let us know if you have a concern.
Anything else? Seeing none. I want to thank you for coming out tonight. We really appreciate it. And stay tuned and see you at the October 16th town meeting. Thank you very much.